Hi, friends. My name is Amy Wikstrom, and I'm the Executive Director of Puget Sound Revels. I'm here today for a special segment called Backstage Banter. During this segment, we will peek behind the curtains to talk a little bit about the artistic process of putting together a Revels production. And today I have with me Michelle Matlock, who is our playwright and stage director, and Martin Christoffel, who is our set designer. Ask them a couple of questions and let you hear a little bit about the creative process, the whys and the whos are behind this production, and just learn a little bit more. So I'm going to start with Michelle. Michelle, welcome, and thank you for being on our virtual Backstage Banter today. I'd like to just start, Michelle, with how you got involved with the Revels and tell us a little bit about that journey.
I think it was in 2018, 2019. Mary Lynn, who was the founder of the Puget Sound Revels and was the executive director at that time, she heard about me and that I was in town, that I had recently come back to town. She took a solo performance class of mine. And then after that whole experience, she asked me out for coffee and talked to me a lot about Revels and some of the vision that she had around it, and asked if I wanted to be involved in terms of helping to assistant direct at that time. And that BJ at the time was looking towards retirement. They both were looking towards his retirement and wondering who was going to take over their baby. And I thought it was wonderful, and I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I jumped in on that first show that was in 2000. It was before the pandemic because it was a full show, so it was 2019, I believe. So that's how it all started.
Well, and this is your debut as the director and playwright of this production. And I just love to hear a little bit about how you came to understanding Seneca Village and what inspired you about Seneca Village to make it into a Rebels production.
I stumbled across Seneca Village earlier in the year or last year, when I knew that I was going to be directing for the first time, and that because we're trying to, Revels' mission of, trying to expand the stories that they tell, I knew that I would most likely need to write it also, because maybe something didn't exist already. And so I was looking, and I know that we're always in a village, a small town in Eastern Europe or parts of Europe. So I was like, what's a village? I knew I wanted to shape it off an American style show. And so I thought, what? And so I just like searched for, African American villages in the United States. And Seneca Village was one of the first things that popped up, and I had never heard of Seneca Village before. And so as I dug deeper into that history and what we know of that history, and that it was just sort of coming to light in the past, 5 or 10 years, I found this history, and that it was a mixture of African Americans, Irish, German, indigenous. And I thought, this seems like the perfect village to be inspired by for a Revels show. And so I began to do more research, and I began to put together a little story that's inspired by that story. It's not an exact replica of the story, but yeah, so that's how I got to the Seneca Village.
Wonderful. And what I think is fascinating about this is I know you spent a lot of time in New York, and I've talked to people who've lived in New York who had no idea what Seneca Village was. And so this is sort of a recent rediscovering of this history. And there's a lot of new research being done and some new information coming out about Seneca Village. You've actually walked the Central Park Village Trail, where there's markers honoring this section. So, Michelle, there are some challenges to creating characters when there aren't a lot of historical references to the people in the village. Can you talk a little bit about what your process was in terms of character creation?
Sure, yeah, that is a challenge. And I've spent the better part of the past 30 years getting untold African American stories, historical stories, and writing about them and writing shows about them. And so what I learned very early on in my experience is that as an African American writing these stories, I have to take the liberty to use my imagination. So I have to gather as much history as I possibly can about the actual historical event. And then I have to get comfortable with using my imagination and my calling upon my ancestors, and also referencing other things that were happening at the same time that maybe are written about, to pull from in terms of character, or what they, how the, their point of view and all these different things. So it's a lot of, to be honest, meditating around the subject matter, surrounding myself with as much history as I can of that time period, and taking the liberty to also use my imagination and tap into my own DNA, I guess, my family and stories, and bringing that together to create a, hopefully, as much of a well-rounded character and story as I can.
So Andrew Williams was the founder of Seneca Village. And in the course of my Google searching, learning about Seneca Village, I happened upon a family history book, self-published by Mariah Williams, wife of Andrew Williams, now the only known descendants of Seneca Village. And we were able to reach out to them and connect with them personally over Zoom. What was that like, Michelle, in terms of understanding a little bit more of the Andrew Williams character and garnishing any other information that helped you in forming that character?
Oh, that was an amazing conversation. It gave me so many insights, and knowledge as to what they knew about their ancestor and ancestors, because one of the big things was that I knew that Andrew Williams was free. I didn't know that he was maybe free all his life. And I also didn't know that that family was free. And they told me they traced it all the way back to the 1700s. So they're totally coming from free folks. And, in my mind, just because we don't hear about that in our history so much, is that I'm thinking about, this is the time period of slavery. So, you know, we're slaves, but there's so many more stories in that. So anyway, it was great to hear what they know, what has been passed down in their family. And then the other important thing is that they confirmed for me was that, so a lot of people would ask me, how are you going to do this show that doesn't have a great ending in the Revels style, which is so much about joy and like celebration? And I had always thought, like, no, this is a celebration of like resilience and community, and it's perfect for Revels. And they confirmed that to me, because they don't see their story of their ancestor as being like a tragedy. They see it as like a legacy. And even though, all the people of Seneca Village were removed because of Central Park, they went on to do wonderful things and create wonderful legacies for their future family. So they just confirmed that to me, and they were so lovely and so amazing. It was like life-changing conversation.
Great. I'm excited about some of the traditions that will be showcased in this particular production. Can you talk about some of the cultural traditions that we're going to experience?
Yeah, I'm excited about that too. We have a great hand bone artist that will be in the show, and that tradition that was born out of slavery will be featured in a very exciting, fun way. And the story behind hand bone will also be shared in the show. And we also have a tap dancer that will be featured in the show, just showing how Irish clogging influenced African American tapping at that time. So that's going to be really fun. Of course, our folk band will be there, and all African American folk band this year, which is super exciting. And I don't know if that's ever happened in Revels before. And so we'll have some bone playing, which was traditional way to create rhythms of the time, and African drumming. Will of course, we're bringing in some Irish dancing, traditional Irish dancing, and some African American style what we would call kind of line dancing now, but back in the day, it was just sort of a ritual that happened in a circle that I'm really excited to share with you. And of course, some of the Revels traditions, just in terms of like mummers play and sword dance, and those traditions are all folded in. So it's a mixture of a lot of different fun traditions.
So Martin, your work is fascinating, particularly for this show, because as we were mentioning, there's not a lot of historical information to go on when a village was, plowed over to make Central Park happen. How do you, as a set designer, approach that work, and what is your creative process?
Well, the first thing I do is I take the script, and Michelle wrote the script over the summer, and we then started just talking about what were the needs of the script and some of the history and some of the things that we've already discussed. I take all of that in, and I understand the time period, and I begin researching to get some visual information about how structures were built, how they appeared. I'm doing that in both the library that I have here, as well as just online resources, online libraries. And you can dig around and find all sorts of interesting photography from the 1860s, which is right after Seneca Village had become no more, and they started building the park. But what's interesting about that is that the photography from that era is of buildings that are built earlier. It's not like brand new 1860 construction. So and there are earlier photos as well. Most of the photography that I was finding was actually of kind of the vernacular buildings, not anything really super special, no major cathedrals and things like that specifically. And a lot of it was actually found in the New York area. So that all then kind of filters through my mind, and I have to think about, okay, this is the type of structure, this is the kind of look that these buildings would have had. Because this is actually a decent village. It's not some ramshackle shanty town. There were people who owned their property and built proper homes, and invited other communities to live there as well, other immigrants, and it was a fully functional little town out in the boonies at the time, from the downtown of New York City. So all that said, I have all of that, but then I go back to the script, and I have to look at the script and see what's required. So, we know we need to represent a home. We know we need to represent a village. We know we need to represent interiors. We also have to represent an office in the downtown. So how do you go about doing that? And that's where just, years of doing Revels and doing other theater comes together. And, just thinking in terms of providing the director with as much flexibility, for one, in creating these different locations, and even thinking about what those scene changes could be like. If there's a piece that is on wheels that moves around, what do we see on the back? What do we see on the front? Or can the back be used? Can the front be used? Can the side be used? Yeah, all of these things. So that's one of the things that will be apparent in the show this year, is that there are a number of discrete pieces that can be repurposed and reused in different ways and become completely different settings.
Absolutely. And, there are some constraints to being in this historic theater. And I hope people have seen your work before, because it's quite striking. And I'm also kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about how you interact with the lighting design and how that informs your process to being able to be flexible in terms of how the lighting design will play with what you're designing.
Sure. When, yeah, lighting and scenery really do go hand in hand. And when I am working on a design, in the background, nobody else here necessarily would be aware of this, but Mark and I actually talk. Mark is the lighting designer, and I bounce ideas off of him and ask him what he needs to accommodate something or allow an effect to occur, because there are effects that both of us have to work on. Even something as basic as having if you've seen our show before, or just in general in theater, a big blank cyclorama, which is fabric piece that typically is upstage, that changes color. It's very common in dance. It's very common in musical theater. There are lights that have to change those colors and light that up. And so I think about that, but then I think about how the heck is he going to squeeze those lights in between my scenery and that cyclorama to get that to actually work? Or if we have an effect where we need, say, a starry sky, how does that work on a light colored cyclorama? Just in general, in terms of being able to sculpt the stage with lighting, that's something that a lighting designer absolutely does. It's not just about making the people look good, which is by far the most important aspect of it, but to create something that allows the stage scenery and the costumes and everything to kind of all pull together, all knit together into a uniform look and into interesting pictures and moments throughout the show. Those are the types of collaborations that I have with him. And in general, I've been doing it long enough too that I can say, okay, it would be great if he could put a light inside this. For example, we have some structures on stage this year that resemble whitewashed buildings, lime wash. It was basically like painting, and it protected and sealed the wood. So consequently, the buildings are going to be very light toned, and that means they will take light very nicely. They will take color very nicely. So we'll be able to achieve a lot of different dimensionality. And those buildings also have some windows in them, and it would be nice to have those windows light up. So I have to think about that.
Yes, and also, if the audience doesn't know this already, the Rialto doesn't have space backstage. So you can't just wheel off a major piece of set and put it somewhere, which speaks a little bit more to how flexible your design needs to be, because there's no room to push a big bed off of stage, for example, or something to that nature. Everything needs to have purpose and be able to mostly remain on stage. How does that play into how you have to really look at that script and kind of think through the movement of some of these pieces?
So I have to think about that. Absolutely. Other theaters, even at the Pantages, there would be wing space. In the Rialto, when you're looking out, the stage right side is about 6 to 7 feet of space. There's no room to move it. There's just enough room to move people around, basically. So everything else has to go off to the other side. And to make a couch, for example, you can line up 3 or 4 benches, and suddenly on stage that becomes a couch that we believe is a couch. The imagination that can really be involved, and it's the actors and performers who are selling it, if you will. They are the ones that they believe it's a couch. So guess what? We all believe it's a couch. And that's, like I was saying, building flexibility into the stage design, it really helps deal with creating these different scenes.
Well, I have seen some of your renderings, and it's very exciting. Martin, how long have you been doing the design for the Revels?
1996 was my first
Wow.
time. So 28 years. This is my 28th year. It's been quite some time. So if you've seen Revels before, you've seen my work on stage.
Absolutely. I wanted to recognize that length of time you've been with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to kick this over to Nika, and she's going to talk a little bit about box office and ticket sales.
Yes, so tickets are live for our December show. These are the dates. We'll be presenting 5 performances from December 14th to 18th, 2024. And you can get tickets online at PugetSoundRevels.org, or you can call our box office phone number, which is 253-242-3434. And we will be selling tickets, and we hope to see everyone there. We're so excited. This is going to be a really, really amazing show. I'll just add, I've been to several rehearsals now and watched the creative process unfold, been to the production meetings, and I've seen so many incredible things coming together for this. So it's very, very exciting.
Great. Thank you, Nika. And I just want to thank Michelle and Martin again for taking time today for our first of what I hope are many backstage banters. Thanks again for sharing your insights, and we're really looking forward to the show.